Kenneth Lee Kinsey, Kinsey.
All right.
I'm fine, sir.
Good. Dr. Kinsey, let's talk a little bit about your career and who you are. First of all, just kind of introduce yourself to the jury a little bit and tell them where you grew up and where you went to school, and then we'll start to talk about your law enforcement career and your expert qualifications.
Yes, sir, happily. I grew up a long way from here in a little county called Orangeburg. I was there about 54 years, my whole life. Went away for college a couple times and came back. And I'm currently the Chief Deputy of the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office. And I'm also a professor of criminal justice at Claflin University, where I teach crime scene related classes.
All right, and pull that mic a little bit closer to you. Let's first of all, before we get to the professorship and what led to that, let's talk about your law enforcement career. So walk me back to the beginning, and if you could just kind of walk through the various stages of your career and the things that you did along the way that led you to become the Chief Deputy for Orangeburg.
Yes, sir. I began my law enforcement career approximately 30 years ago, and I've held many positions in those 30 years. But for the last 22 years, my concentration, other than administration, has been crime scene investigations and working violent crime scenes. I have ran the crime scene unit in Orangeburg for 6 or 7 years, and then I went on to SLED for approximately 4 years, and then I came back, and now I directly supervise the captain of investigations, and investigations includes the crime scene unit. So I'm still hands-on on crime scenes, either as a primary or a backup crime scene investigator. And as I mentioned earlier, I teach crime scene investigation and other criminal justice related courses. I received my bachelor's degree from Clemson University in 1991. My master's degree in science from Troy University in 2011, and my PhD from Walden University in 2019 with a concentration on use of force cases involving police officers. And my research is use of force and crime scene investigations.
So we could call you Dr. Kinsey, correct?
My grandmother told me it's what you answer to, but yes, sir, I'll answer to that,
All
Kenny,
right.
or Chief Kinsey.
And we could call you Professor Kinsey, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And then we could call you Chief Kinsey as well.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the law enforcement. Then I want to talk a little bit more about the education. Now, you mentioned that you've done a lot of administration, and tell the jury just a little bit about what it is to be the chief, and just what that entails, and then we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the crime scene stuff, if you would.
Yes, sir. I answer directly to an elected sheriff. I'm the number 2 man at the sheriff's office, and I supervise approximately, when we're full, when every slot is full, I supervise over 127 people, 105 are certified law enforcement men and women. And that encompasses about 9 different divisions at the sheriff's office, including narcotics, special operations, criminal investigations, civil, courtroom, school resource officers. There's several groups in there, and our civilian employees.
Now, as you've already testified, you don't just do the administration stuff as the number 2 man, but over your career, you've also extensively done actual law enforcement work, processing homicide and other major crime scenes. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I have. I have boots on the ground, processed north of 800 death scenes. Not all of those are homicide. That also includes suicides, accidental deaths, and unexplained deaths. That is either as a primary investigator or as a secondary investigator in my career. And I still have a directive that I placed with my coworkers approximately 11 years ago. I still go to every death scene if possible.
And over that time, you said over 800 death scenes over the course of your career. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then, how many pieces of forensic evidence do you think you've processed over the years?
That would be hard to determine, multiple pieces for each scene, but part of my duties...
Homicides then?
Yes, sir. Part of my duties when I was at SLED was to also process evidence that was submitted through the door. And what through the door means, these are items of evidence from other agencies that have worked their own crime scenes, and they send their items to SLED for an analysis. And that's in the thousands. I would have no way to give you a quantitative number.
In the thousands?
Yes, sir.
Is it also over the years, have you attended autopsies as part of your investigative work as it relates to death scenes?
That is correct. Every agency I have worked at had a mandate that you attend autopsies to collect evidence, do major case prints, GSR, and that kind of thing. And also to give the pathologist an idea of your interpretation of what happened.
And have you ever been asked to consult on death cases in jurisdictions throughout the state or even in other states?
Yes, sir, I have.
And describe that to the jury, please.
As a consultant, I work for, to be frank and honest, sometimes it's against law enforcement. Sometimes it's defending law enforcement, just depending on what I believe is wrong and right. And I have participated with private attorneys in the civil process doing both. And I've also been asked by colleagues and comrades across the country to review a piece of evidence if they may have needed a qualified examiner to technically or administratively review that piece of evidence or their findings.
All right. Before I come back to the specific crime scene training and experience that you have, I just want to go back again to your education. You went to Clemson, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, and started a law enforcement career not long after that?
That is correct.
And what year did you graduate Clemson?
I was on a 5-year plan. I graduated in 1991, and I started as a reserve deputy. The records are a little shaky because back then you worked until they had a certification class, but best I can guess was somewhere around 92, 93.
So 91 Clemson?
Yes, sir.
I was 92 Carolina. So. All right. Then you went on to Troy University at some point later in your career?
I did, yes, sir. I attended Troy's satellite campus, which is in Sumter, an actual brick and mortar school. And the purpose of Troy being placed in Sumter is because of Shaw Air Force Base. A lot of our men and women who protect our country use their GI Bills to further their education at such campuses. And I had to travel 1 night a week and 2 days a week for approximately 1.5 years to complete that and pass proficiency.
All right. That competency exam, is that a pretty tough exam?
It's the second toughest thing I've ever done. Yes, sir.
Is the pass rate pretty low on that thing first time?
It is very low. We probably had 30 people in our class, and I only know of 4 that passed the competency the first time.
Were you one of them?
Yes, sir.
And then you went on and got your doctorate, is that right?
I did, yes, sir.
And that was a Walden University program there?
It was, yes, sir.
Did you have to do any residencies with that?
Mr. Waters, we'll stipulate to him as a qualified expert if we can just go ahead and move on. Thank you.
Your Honor, the state's entitled to explore the extent of his qualifications. That goes directly to the value of his opinion to the jury. I'll do it expeditiously, but I think we're entitled to do that.
Do you accept the stipulation or no?
I do accept the stipulation. I would like to very quickly finish up the qualification process so that the jury understands that.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is so qualified. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right. So real quick, you did some residencies in your doctorate, is that correct?
I did 4 residencies in Atlanta, yes, sir.
All right. And ultimately did dissertation and all that comes with getting your doctorate relevant to criminal justice and criminology, is that correct?
I defended my prospectus and my dissertation, yes, sir, successfully.
All right. Now, let's get to the last thing I want to cover as far as your qualifications, but what specific areas of crime scene investigation and reconstruction have you had training and experience and previous qualifications in?
Yes, sir. I have been certified internationally by the International Association for Identification as a crime scene technician. That's a 5-year deal, and then 5 years as a crime scene investigator, where you have to do practical and written examinations, and you have to have statistics in your background, a certain number of each item to even be able to take the test.
All right.
And that encompasses all of the different aspects of crime scene investigation. My training also encompasses footwear and tire tread examination, bloodstain pattern analysis, crime scene reconstruction, fingerprint examination, and fabric impression, but I haven't done a lot of the fabric impression.
All right. Have you ever been qualified in courts of record as an expert in crime scene examination and reconstruction?
Yes, sir, I have.
How many times?
Approximately 35, 36 times.
Have you ever been qualified as an expert in fingerprint examination?
I have, yes,
How
sir.
many times?
Maybe 20, 25.
Yep.
Sometimes, and let me explain why. Sometimes it's not individually. Sometimes you'll qualify for 2 or 3 of the different disciplines, and I didn't keep track of which time, was singular or which time was multiple qualifications.
All right. And then have you ever been qualified as an expert in footwear examination?
I have, sir, approximately 8 times.
And tire tread as well?
Yes, sir.
All right. I believe that that's what I wanted to go through with your qualifications, which I believe you stipulate in those areas. Is that correct? All right. Let's move on. Did you have an opportunity to review at the request of the state the crime scene here as it relates to Maggie and Paul?
I did, yes, sir.
All right. And just very quickly, what are some of the types of things that you reviewed as part of your process?
Because I feel it's pertinent to help me answer some questions. And the questions that or the things I wanted to accomplish from this reconstruction, you can determine sequence, you can determine movement. A lot of times you can determine the number of blows, or in the event of a hand-to-hand combat or a firearm was used, those kind of things. So I examined forensic reports that were issued by law enforcement laboratories. I also examined extensively photographs that were taken on the scene, measurements, that kind of thing, and I also responded to the scene. It was rather close, and I took my own measurements.
When you say responded to the scene, when did you first get involved in this case?
The end of 2022, and I'm not talking about when the scene was actually going on. I went after the fact and did my own measurements.
All right. And when you were retained by the state in this case, were you told any particular goal, or were you told to just take a fresh look at it and offer your opinions?
I was told to look at all of the evidence and determine what I may be helpful on, and to use my own judgment objectively, independently, and come up with my own conclusions.
All right, let's talk about, if we can, and again, we're going to have to deal with some of, maybe not the images as much, but deal with some of the injuries that Maggie and Paul suffered, correct?
Yes, sir.
Let's, if you could, just remind the jury, what were the injuries that Paul suffered, please?
They were very, very severe firearms injuries. One was a shotgun wound to just a little anatomical left of the midline of the body. One was to the shoulder, and it proceeded into the jaw and ultimately into the head.
And was that the first injury or the second?
The first injury was the shotgun wound to the middle of the chest, and it was non-fatal.
All right.
At least not fatal immediately.
And then what about the second injury?
The second injury was immediate death.
And were you able, in reviewing the crime scene evidence, to come to any conclusions as to the order in which Paul suffered those gunshot wounds from the shooter?
Yes, sir, I was.
All right, and please relate that to the jury.
My conclusion was that the first non-fatal wound to the midline of the body occurred as Paul was standing with his body canted in the middle of that dog food room, pointed slightly southwest, and the shot entered the midline of his chest, exited his underarm, entered his underarm on the actual arm, and exited the outside of his arm, and most of those 9 pellets proceeded through the back window of that dog food room.
Right, and then just real quick, you said 9 pellets. So explain that to the jury why you say 9 pellets.
That double-aught buckshot shot shell contains 9 pellets and I guess you'd describe it as a styrofoam packing to keep it tight so it doesn't shake. And when that cartridge is expelled out of the end of that barrel, the styrofoam packing dissipates or goes its own way, and those projectiles continue in the correct path.